distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure indeed a privilege to join you at this second FBN Capital Investor Conference. I will speak about the next steps for moving from a frontier market to an emerging market. My sense at this point is that Nigeria probably has it all ahead. It is, as you might argue, ours to lose. There are days when I think we are determined to lose it, but there are probably now more days when I think we just might make it. But I think what's pretty clear is that at the heart of it, emerging economies simply speak to the prospects, the rapidity of growth, industrialization. Frontier economies, yes, also do speak to prospects, but they speak also to a certain tinge of risk, volatility, uncertainty. And the question, of course, that all of that simply begs is how does Nigeria lose the tinge of risk, uncertainty, to join a calmer, more predictable, but nonetheless rapidly growing and industrializing group of nations termed emerging markets. Now, I'm not going to walk through this presentation slide by slide, and I will crave your indulgence to play around with it as I please. But what's pretty clear, if you look, this is how countries tend to develop. You start by dependence on your natural endowments, basically two sectors: agriculture and mining, extractive industries we call them. Over time, you begin to industrialize. In that process, you see much more rapid growth in the processing sectors: manufacturing, construction, utilities. Those are the three key elements of processing. In other words, you process what you got as a natural endowment into something else. And then by the time the economy gets to maturity, then you're talking of service sectors playing a significant part. The challenge for Nigeria is that in 1960, at independence, our extractive sectors was something like 2/3 of the economy. Today, 2012, 52 years later, agriculture is 42%, oil and gas is about 16–17%, which means roughly 60%. It suggests that we haven't gone very far in half a century. That is one of the biggest challenges that we are going to face. Manufacturing today is 4% of Nigeria's economy. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot, on the back of 4% as manufacturing outputs, contribution to the economy, make significant progress, especially for one reason. At 160 million plus people, with more than 50% of that population under the age of 15, the rate at which you need to create jobs means that without an industrial, an efficient, well-functioning industrial capacity, it is unlikely that we will create the number of jobs that we require. Without being able to create the number of jobs that we require, it means that our chances of social, political cohesion will be undermined. Notwithstanding the fact that the global economy has been growing rather slowly, The euro area is not doing well and projected to actually contract next year. Commodity prices easing, doubtless. But nonetheless, Nigeria continues to be favorably aided by strong oil prices. Beyond global markets, beyond reform, the profile of spend in this economy is changing. And that, for me, holds the key, in part, to where we are headed. And certainly, incomes are rising. Rising incomes, but very badly distributed on the back of 24% unemployment. That's going to be one of the key features of the reaction that we're going to have to manage well. Just at about the same time that telecoms reform was being mooted and being worked on, we started working on electricity reform. In other words, we've been at it for about 12 years, and yet we are still doing roughly 3,000, 4,000 megawatts of power. What makes it very uninspiring is that as far back as 1962, the Canadians, who then had a major responsibility for the power utilities in Nigeria, had projected that about this time in our national life, we would require roughly 40,000 megawatts of power. So if in 1962 we were able, or we were advised as such, and 50 years later we're still 10% of that, pretty slow reform, I think. Now, the point about health in particular, and also education, which is for me probably the most astonishing, two things. Number one, people are now conditioned, are actually paying for what used to be publicly provided services. So we're now used to paying for education. We're now used to paying for health. This economy is evolving. We're moving from subsistence, we're perhaps beginning to live. At least the pattern of our expenditure is showing that we're beginning to live. In other words, for me, the transition from being a frontier subsistence-based economy is already beginning to be manifest. For me, to become an emerging market, there are a number of things. And at the heart of it for me is governance. Nigeria, in my judgment, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not, if we are to move beyond the successes, limited as they are, that we have achieved so far, we're going to have to define an enlightened, get an elite consensus around a national self-interest. What is it exactly that Nigeria should be doing? Where should we be going? If only we would answer the question, what does it mean to be a Nigerian? And for me, I'm actually very clear. By the way, this is me simply taking the liberty of an academic. For me, to be a Nigerian must mean you are able to see the opportunities around you. To be able to do that, irrespective of the circumstances of your birth, to be able to do that, education becomes an imperative. The government, in my judgment, can, must, should provide education free up to a certain level, or else, what does it mean to be a Nigerian? Even if you know the opportunities, you can see them, you may not be able to take advantage of them simply because you're unhealthy. So health becomes an imperative for government action. And of course, you're healthy, you can see the opportunities, you're going after them, but your life is unsecure. So safety of life and property, for me, those are the three fundamental things that we should agree that government should do, or at least facilitate doing. If we were to be able to get the scope for governance right, the real philosophy for governance right, then I think we'd build a consensus around which we could unite, and that would hasten the process of understanding what government should be for and what it should be about. I'm one of those who's pragmatic enough to know that if only we were agreed on the role of government, of governance, then perhaps these conflicts would reduce in scope and in size. I've come to the conclusion that very few times do governments in Nigeria have any empathy or indeed sympathy for capital. And because of that, they raise the level of risk and uncertainty. And that, in my judgment, cannot be good for our emergence from frontier to emerging market. Risk and the reduction of risk is one of the fundamental characterizations of a movement from frontier to emerging market.